On February 16th, 1984, Darrell Siggers was at a house party thrown by the mother of his two children. In attendance were three young men, including 25-year-old James Montgomery. These men were highly intoxicated and started a huge brawl. After the trio left the party, James Montgomery was shot dead in the street, and his two friends identified the gunman as Darrell Siggers. Their in court IDs, coupled with the testimony of a police forensics expert, sealed Darrell's fate. But this is wrongful conviction. Welcome back to Wrongful Conviction. We're here recording at the Innocence Network conference in New Orleans, which has been just as incredible as a conference can be. 475 exonerees here have served close to 10,000 years in prison collectively. I know that's a lot of numbers, but we're going to break it down, make it a lot more granular, because we're here to tell a story that comes out of Detroit, Michigan. And by the end of this episode, if you're not angry, it's probably because you weren't paying enough attention. So rewind, hit it again, because this is an important story to tell. It's got a lot of the same factors that we see over and over again in these wrongful conviction cases, but it's also got some things that I've never seen before, which, well, you'll find out soon. So here to tell this story is the man himself, Darrell Siggers, who lived through this 34-year nightmare of wrongful conviction, 34 years in prison for a crime he had nothing to do with. And Darrell, glad you're here.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for being here. And with him to present this incredible story is his attorney, Wolfgang Mueller. Go by Wolf, right?
Wolf.
And I love Wolf because Wolf is just Flom upside down. You know what I mean? So I feel like that's my spirit animal. You know, it's early in the morning here, but we've got an incredible journey in front of us. So stay tuned. So Darrell, before we get into this crime, which is, you know, this is a very real crime with a very real victim, but what was your life like growing up? Did you grow up in Detroit?
Yes, east side of Detroit. I had a normal life. At the age of 16, that's when things changed. I began to smoke weed. I started having sex and going to dance parties, and that was my life at that point.
Like, I mean, it sounds about like my life too. You know what I mean? Except for we grew up in very different zip codes, and I'm very aware that the color of my skin and the place and neighborhood I grew up in had a lot to do with me not ending up where you ended up. But like a lot of kids all over the country, at 16, that's what, you know, kids do, right? I mean, so that's it sounds like a pretty, for lack of a better word, normal childhood.
Yeah, I would say so. Well, on the east side of Detroit, it's real rough on the east side of Detroit. But my mother and father, they tried to do the best that they could to keep a handle on us, but the streets had a pull on us, and so that's where I went, and which led me to this, being around the wrong crowds, doing some of the wrong things, but being a normal kid, you know what I mean? I didn't have no real direction. I'm just finding myself at this point. You know, like I said, I'm smoking weed and chasing girls and going to dance parties and, you know, just doing what guys do in the hood, and that was my life at that time.
Right, and I'm just saying, like, that's what people do in college campuses and all over the place, right? It's sort of almost a rite of passage. Not every kid does it, and, you know, more power to you if you don't, but nothing out of the ordinary there, I wouldn't say. Nothing crazy anyway, right?
No.
So then we fast forward to 1984, right? You're 20 years old at the time that this crime took place, that they ended up pinning on you for reasons we're going to get into here, but not for any reasons that made any sense. You know, I mean, it's real easy to look back and try to just try to understand or try to rationalize why they did what they do, but they do this all the time. It seems like they just want to clear the case. But Wolf, take us through this. What happened on that fateful night, and how did they end up getting it so wrong?
There was a party at Darrell's baby mama's house. Darrell had a young child with her. Several people showed up, including the victims, Montgomery and Jackson and a couple other guys. They got into an altercation. There were a lot of people at the party, Darrell being one of them, and being 18, 19, 20 years old, a lot of testosterone mixed with alcohol, I think, and somebody dating Darrell's baby mama, and he's in the house, things got to be a little heated. There was a fight that broke out. And a guy who was at the party named Toby Red, real light-skinned guy, black guy who could pass for white, reddish hair, that's how he got the name. He leaves the party after getting in a brawl with one of these guys, and he walks out of the house threatening, "I'll be back, I got something for your ass." Several minutes later, the three guys who were ultimately the victims who got shot at, one of whom, Montgomery, who got killed, they leave the house. About a block and a half away, somebody comes out between two houses with a rifle and shoots. Montgomery gets killed. To the other guys, they run away. And the police end up finding out that there was this party. So they interview everybody at the party. The two central people who are witnesses in this case, they interview a guy named Gary Kelly, who just happens to lives a block and a half down where the shooting happened. Mind you, this is about a block and a half away from the house party. Kelly ends up telling the police, in fact, the lead detective later, Joseph Alex, there was a light-skinned guy. I thought it was my white neighbor. He was wearing a light blue shirt. This is February. It's cold, but he's wearing a light blue shirt. He's carrying a long gun, walking by past his garage. Alex interviews that neighbor. That guy says, "It wasn't me." And so Alex now closes this alternate suspect issue off. One of the guys who was shot at says it was Darrell. They call him Little Man. He was the guy who shot us. So all of a sudden they had a suspect that they could identify at the party, Darrell, and they just focused on him, which is a lot of times what the homicide section did and probably happens around the country. As soon as they got somebody, the expediency of it makes them not look at anybody else and ignore all of the other evidence that might suggest it's not who they think it is. So that's ultimately what happened. Darrell got railroaded. He got arrested. There was a person who was a friend of Christine Arnold, Darrell's baby mama. His name was Fuqua. He lived about kitty corner behind the house of the party. He said there was this guy, Toby Red, who he knew, came to his house shortly after he found out there was a shooting with a long gun, looking for one of the guys at the party. Fuqua wouldn't let him in his house, and Toby Red left. So we have two identifications. One who says Toby Red, who is this light-skinned guy, has a long gun right after the party, comes to Fuqua's house. A block and a half away, you have a neighbor with no connection to any of these people, disinterested witness, and he says there's a light-skinned guy. Well, when they eliminated the white neighbor, that left a light-skinned guy with a long gun out there. You put two and two together, that's Toby Red. And the detective hid all of that evidence from the prosecutor. That became the key to one of the keys to Darrell's exoneration and later on to our civil case. As you've probably been aware and your neighbor or your listeners know, the Brady rule. You have to disclose evidence of an alternate suspect. Otherwise, it's a violation of due process and a defendant's right to a fair trial. That's what happened in this case. There was a major Brady violation by not disclosing the evidence of an alternate suspect, because the evidence against Darrell came down to a kid who was drunk and high who said it was Darrell Siggers. Well, if you could have put this alternate suspect out there, then as the defense lawyers like to say, it's the Saudi defense. Some other dude did it. Not just, it wasn't me, because a lot of times it wasn't me. It's a weak defense. Some other dude did it, and we can identify who it was. Now you have reasonable doubt.
It's pretty incredible that they ignored two very credible witnesses, and that we have a situation where not only does Darrell not fit the description, not even by a stretch, right? I mean, nobody's going to mistake him for a light-skinned guy, white, whatever, with reddish hair. I mean, seriously? Like, that's ridiculous. But it's also important that we recognize that when the cops were doing this, they were actually working in service of the actual perpetrator, or who we think almost certainly was the actual perpetrator, right? They're literally protecting him and allowing him to remain free. He must have gone out, like when you got arrested or convicted, he was like, he had the best day of his life. He's like, I'm good now. I can go out and shoot somebody else if I want to, do whatever the fuck I want. So it's, that's something that I think is so important for us to just, hammer over and over again, that even if you're not somebody who is deeply concerned about wrongful convictions because you think it might not happen to you or somebody you love, you should be concerned about the actual perpetrator remaining free, because that guy is obviously a dangerous guy. He had no compunction about shooting at these people. So, I mean, and even with that sinister statement he made leaving the house party, it's like, what is this, a movie? This guy's, come on, it's crazy. So, Darrell, how did you first find out about this murder, and when did you get arrested?
Well, a couple of days after the party, my son and daughter's mother, Christine, calls me. She said, the police came by, they want to talk to you. And I said, why do they want to talk to me? She said, well, a guy got killed. I didn't know at that time. And when I was like, what? Somebody got killed? And so she said, well, I gave them your father's number. At the time I was living with my father. So they called my father and they want to talk to me. And I told them, I don't want to talk to them, because in my neighborhood, every time anybody in my neighborhood spoke with the police, it was not a good outcome. And so that was something that I recognized. They had in Detroit, they had stress. They had all these type of different police units that was doing horrible stuff to guys in the hood. So my father convinced me. He said, listen, if you ain't got nothing to hide, boy, talk to these people. So I agreed to talk to him. At the time, I was at my brother's house, but I was living with him. I come back home. They promised me. They said, listen, we just want to talk to you. As soon as I walked in the door, they said, you're under arrest for first-degree murder, slap the cuffs on me. And that's how this whole thing started, insofar as me being put in jail and in police custody.
Yeah, I've heard that story before. I mean, and when people say don't talk to the police, you'd be a perfect example of why. I mean, I don't know what your options were in the situation. Sooner or later, they were going to come find you and arrest you anyway.
Yeah.
So it's not like, I don't see a different outcome no matter how you would have behaved. You weren't going to run away and go to Bolivia, So
Absolutely not.
I mean, they had their sights set on you, and they were going to get you, and it was over before it started. I mean, what chance did a young black kid have in Detroit in 1984 with this, these people that had all this power? They were closing in on you, and it was over before it started.
And let me just interject, if I may, from a historical perspective, so the people, the audience understands. When he mentions stress, the Detroit police in the late 60s and early 70s had a unit. Stress was the acronym: Stop the Robberies, Enjoy Safe Streets. It was a bunch of big white cops and the famous Big Four who would abuse black men, including planting evidence on them. One cop was convicted or charged of planting a knife on a person he shot. So there was such abuse of black people, black men particularly, in that time frame. They ended up disbanding the stress unit because of that abuse. And so when Darrell talks about in his neighborhood, if the police are coming, it is not going to be a good outcome. It's because they had that historical perspective.
This case is one of those cases that I like to say came with instructions, right? You didn't have to be Columbo or Sherlock Holmes to figure this one out. They had the guy. They didn't want that guy for whatever reason. Who knows? Maybe he was helping them with something else. I don't know. But maybe we'll never know. Or maybe you guys do know. But the fact is, he skated. He went on with his life, and you went to trial. So how long? I'm assuming you were held without bail.
Yes, and the interrogation was brutal. I mean, that's a part of this story that many people don't really understand, where they put you in this little bitty chair, and they leave you there for hours, this little iron chair. And so and they continue to tell me, let me just back up a little bit. After they arrest me, they take me to 1300 Beaubien, Detroit, downtown. I'm on the 9th floor. And then they bring me back down to the 5th floor, which is homicide. And they begin this good cop, bad cop routine. Good cop comes in, hey, would you like some water? Would you like some coffee? I say, yes. He go back out. Mean cop comes back in. Listen, we know you did this. You're going to tell us you did this. And they go on and on, back and forth with this. And they keep you there for hours till they weigh down trying to get me to confess. I don't. So he gets frustrated with me. After this long, long ordeal, I keep telling this guy, you got the wrong guy. I don't know who did this. I don't know nothing about this case. And he says, listen, I'm going to go get a pen and a piece of paper. And you're going to tell me that you did this or I'm going to knock the shit out of you. Now, I'm scared to death. I'm 20 years old, never been in trouble. And here's a big white cop screaming and hollering. And they going through this routine. And they've done this many, many times. So I look over, I see a window. I don't know I'm this high up. I run, jump out the window. 5 stories. Halfway down, I thought to myself, this was not a good idea. But it was nothing I could do. I couldn't go back up. So I fall 3 stories down on the landing. Boom, roll over. And at this point, I'm on autopilot. So at this point, I would have liked to went back up because I said to myself, man, this is not, but I wasn't going to sign a statement confessing to something that I didn't do. So I jumped another 2 stories, hit a car, jumped on a car, fell off the car, rolled over, broke my ankle, broke my wrist, hobbled away. I got maybe a couple of blocks away. 30 cops surround me. They got the George Floyd knee on my neck, 30 guns pointed at me, and I'm in extreme pain. They get me up, throw me in the car, take me to the hospital, patch up my arm, patch up my leg, and then take me to the county jail. And this was the craziest thing. One moment I'm talking to my father in his living room. Next minute, I'm charged with first-degree murder, jumped 5 stories, broken arm, broken leg, and now I'm in the county jail. Craziest thing, it's almost unbelievable.
I gotta take a minute. I mean, it's like a scene from a movie that I've never seen before. I mean, one minute you're talking to your father, everything's normal. Next minute you're like living in this alternate reality. These cops are threatening to beat you up or worse, and you jump out the fucking window.
Jump out the window.
And you literally didn't know what floor you were on.
Nope. I was just trying to get away from, they were terrorizing me. And who was I going to call? The police? They were the ones that was terrorizing me. It was subjecting me to this form of terrorization. And so I can't call my father. There's nothing I can do. So they keep me there for hours with this back and forth routine. And again, I'm not going to sign. I had enough sense to know that I'm not going to sign a statement confessing to a crime that I didn't commit. So I felt like that was my only option.
Wow. That's a miracle you lived through that, you know?
One of the guys who did, it was only one other guy that done that, and he did die. It broke his neck.
He broke out that same window?
Yeah, he broke his neck.
That's what I'm saying. That's a miracle. It wasn't your time to go. But man, and you survived the 3-story jump, only to jump again, and then because you wouldn't be able to make the second jump if you had broken your ankle on the first one, right? Then you wouldn't have stuck on the landing. But yeah,
and the nightmare is only beginning. That's just the first part of the nightmare.
Yeah,
it's
but
it's a 3.5-decade nightmare.
It's a dramatic beginning to a really ugly 3.5 decades, and that's an important part of this story too, because we see. As the trial begins, we see some witnesses that should have immediately been discounted, at least, or disqualified. And I want to get into the trial, but so now you're taken to jail and held there for how long awaiting trial?
6 months.
6 months, which is actually, it's a long time, but a relatively short time compared to what we see typically it's particularly in cases this serious. Of guys that are usually in anywhere from a year to several years awaiting trial. But 6 months, and which jail were you in at that point?
Wayne County Jail, which was horrible. Just horrible.
Can you describe the situation there?
Well, when I first got there, Mind you, I got a cast on my leg, cast on my arm. So I get in there, they take me in. I'm in this bullpen, and it's alcoholics, it's drug addicts, it's people laying all over the floor. The stench is horrible. This room is built for maybe like 25 people. They got 50 in it. There's nowhere for you can sit. And the floor was just full of grime and dirt. It was just the nastiest, funkiest, the whole situation was just bad. So we get in this room, and in my mind, I'm saying to myself, I'm not finna sit on this nasty, dirty floor. There's people laying all on the benches. So I stood for maybe like 2 hours, but I couldn't sit. My leg is injured. I can't stand no more. So I got to sit on this floor. I sit on the floor, and that's all you can do. There's nowhere else you can go. You can't go sit on the benches, and there's nowhere even to move. So you sit on this floor, and they do this. I go from bullpen to bullpen to bullpen. They wake you up for any court proceeding at 4:30 in the morning. They send you to another bullpen. You wait a couple of hours there. They send you to another bullpen. You wait a couple of hours there. It's all part of the processing. You just go from bullpen to bullpen to bullpen until you get to the court where you're going to go to the bullpen that's behind the courtroom where you're about to go to trial, and so or to any court proceeding, and that's at like 8:30. So they get you there at 8:30. You got to be there at 9. Court never on time. So sometimes it starts at 10. Sometimes it starts at 11. And all the time, and these county jails are cold. They got air in them. And so all I got on this little jail uniform, and I'm freezing. Every day, this is how it is, every day.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's important for people when you do serve on a jury and you see somebody brought in and they look half crazy or they look like somebody you think looks like they might be engaged in criminal activities, it may well be because of the fact that the night before they didn't get any sleep whatsoever. In New York, they wake you up, I think even earlier, like 3 o'clock in the morning, right? They don't feed you. They put you on this terminal waiting, thing, carousel, whatever you want to call it, right? Of different, facilities and cells and bullpens, and they don't feed you. You miss out on breakfast. Now you're going to basically try to fight for your life with both hands tied behind your back, because how are you supposed to think straight when you're coming out of an environment like that, sleep deprived, hungry, freezing, and then you're supposed to present like somebody who looks like an upstanding citizen, right? That the jury's going to look at and go, yeah, no, like you look now. I mean, you look now like a guy, no one would ever think you were involved in anything other than, I think it's a really underreported aspect of the way our system works, the dehumanization that's designed to drive people crazy before they get to the courtroom. I mean, am I exaggerating this? You're in the midst of it.
You are 100% correct. I've had other clients tell me, and people think prison is so horrible, and then you were in jail before that for some period of time. My clients have told me the Wayne County Jail is designed to get you to plead guilty, because all you know is prison at least has some semblance of order. Wayne County Jail is such a horrific experience, day after day after day after day after day, like you say. It makes you want to plead guilty. That's how bad that is. So you can get some semblance of order in your life. And we talk about breakfast is the most important meal of the day, right? Those of us on the outside. When you're in that environment, and you're right, you're expected to present, especially when you're coming to trial, like you're an upstanding citizen. Hopefully you have this image of you couldn't have done that. Not when you're sleep deprived, not when you're deprived of food. You come in disheveled wreck. It doesn't matter how they dress you. So those are the kind of things that you say they are underreported and underimagined.
And then here comes the trial. So tell us about that. I mean, one of the things that I saw here when I was doing the research on the case is the fact that the two other guys who were shot at, right, is that Lawson and Jackson, right? They identified you as the gunman, although they admitted that they were 100 feet away in the dark. And it's pretty ridiculous to think that someone is going to make a positive identification in the dark from 100 feet away in a situation that's chaotic and violent and dangerous. You know, if you're 100 feet away from a shooting, you're going to be running or turning the other way, or, you know, you can't help it. It's going to be your instinct, right?
That's right.
So, but eyewitness identification is a very powerful thing in a court of law. And people, I'm sure the jury was sitting there like, you know, riveted when these people were talking. But tell us about the trial. Who defended you? Did they present any sort of robust defense for you?
I was represented by an attorney called Timothy Murphy. He did the best that he could, but the deck was stacked even before we got there. And maybe my attorney Wolf can speak to the ballistics aspect of it. But during the trial, they brought in a cast of characters, these guys, and one of the things we didn't know was these guys was in jail also with me. They let these guys collaborate, talk to each other, and you're not supposed to do that. They're not supposed to be able to talk to each other, and so that they could get their stories together. And so we go through the trial. My attorney does the best that he can do, and in spite of all the lies that these guys told, the jury still deliberated for 3 days. The most damning evidence that they presented was the ballistic evidence. This so-called expert from the Detroit Police Department claimed that a bullet that was allegedly found at my home matched a bullet that was found in the deceased body. And according to him, it had identical lands and grooves. Now, I don't know nothing about ballistic identification at this time. I'm 20 years old. I'm a city kid. I don't know nothing about hunting, guns, and none of that type of stuff. But I'm telling my lawyer, it's not true. It's not true. And he told me, I'll never forget this, he told me, shut up, stop acting like a kid, and let me listen to the testimony. I never said another word to him throughout the whole trial unless he said something to me. And so this expert gets up there and he's with all these nice professional words, and he tells the jury he's been in the Detroit crime lab for 6 years. And he testifies that in order for him to even be allowed to present testimony, he has to be trained under a court qualified witness for at least as an apprentice for 2 years. So later on, we find out that this guy, I filed a Freedom of Information Act request for his personnel file. We found out this guy ain't no expert. He wasn't in the Detroit crime lab for, the report showed that he had been in the Detroit crime lab for less than 364 days. Not the 2 years that was required to even give testimony, and not the 6 years that he claimed he had been in the Detroit crime lab. All lies. So.
Under oath.
Under oath. Under oath. And so we continue to go through the trial, and in spite of the 3-day jury deliberation, on the third day, and mind you, you have to come back through the gauntlet. What I call the gauntlet, you have to go from this 4:30 in the morning through bullpen to bullpen, then a changing area. They take you to a changing area. You got to take off, you got to exchange your clothes, the jail clothes for your civilian clothes. And now, so what they do is they line you up with about 15 other guys, y'all all butt naked, butt to butt almost, because you in a line and you ain't got time. They move it, keep it moving, exchange these clothes. Now you got to go to another bullpen to get ready to go to the trial. So we get to the trial, and when they get through deliberating, and I'm almost positive at this point that they're going to find me not guilty, in spite of all the lies that they had told. For some reason, I just had it in my mind. I just believed in the system. They was going to find me not guilty. So when they find me guilty, when I heard the jury say guilty, it was like somebody hit me in the head with a brick because I was dizzy. I fly back down in a chair. Guards come over, they grab me, take me out. And then what they do is they put chains around your waist, chains on your wrists, chains on your legs, and then they march you out and you got to duck walk. They chained me to 20 other guys, and I felt like a slave. They just march you through, and this stuff really breaks your resistance. But I maintained my innocence throughout the whole process, and I said, I'm not pleading guilty. I'm not confessing to no false crimes. I'm innocent. And then here's something else. Having this cast on my leg and on my arm made me pray, because I can't defend myself. And so you got guys in the county jail that look, they like cheaters. They want to take advantage of anybody, the weakest person that they can. And so I had hell in the county jail because I had this cast on, and it was hard for me to defend. I'm 135 pounds at the time, so I'm already small. But anyway, back to the trial. So they found me guilty and chain me up, take me out, and the process begins. And we don't find out about all this ballistic stuff until years later, many years later. This Joseph Alex was the officer in charge of the case. He testified that he had found a bullet in my home, but he himself signed a return warrants for my home saying nothing taken, dry hole, results negative. He didn't get anything from my home. All lies. None of that stuff came out at trial. He tested. So if you tell the jury, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have uncontroverted, now this is the prosecutor's argument. He said, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have uncontroverted proof that the defendant did this killing. We found a bullet in his home that matched the bullet removed from the deceased body. Now, if you tell the jury that, what else is there to discuss? I've connected you to the weapon.
They claim they found the bullet in the wall, right?
Yes.
Right, like you were shooting guns in your own house.
Yes.
Because everybody does that.
Right. And what it was a next door was what they referred to as what we used as a shooting gallery, what guys we use as a shooting gallery. And so.
What do you mean?
Guys in the hood, everybody I don't know everybody, but guys would come and fire weapons in the next door apartment. And so this is where they found this bullet. And so, but here's the thing. The bullet that they found in the wall that they claimed matched the bullet that was from the deceased body had 4 lands and grooves. The bullet that they got from the deceased body had 12 lands and grooves. So it was impossible for them to match. And even the first year cadet should have known this. I didn't. And so it went on and on and on until later I was able to hire, 30 years later, I hired a ballistic expert because Detroit Crime Lab ended up closing. The Michigan State Police closed the Detroit Crime Lab because they were just fudging a lot of the ballistic reports. They were just using false metrics and all types of stuff to come up with a result. So the Michigan State Police closed it. So this was in 2008. And so afterwards, I began to suspect that, well, I knew that what they had did was BS. And what some of their testimony was BS. I just couldn't prove it. I didn't know how they done it so I ended up getting, and Wolf will speak more to this, I ended up getting a firearm examiner, and he was the one who connected dots and found out, he unraveled their whole case. He was like, this is all bullshit. This stuff couldn't have matched, couldn't have came from this weapon, all bullshit.
Yeah, and if only you would have had an expert on your side that could have challenged it. I mean, they might have still believed the cops because juries are naturally inclined to believe the cops. Hopefully after you hear this, you'll be less inclined. So you're convicted in this joke of a trial, let's call it what it is, and sentenced to life in prison?
Yes.
With or without the possibility of parole?
Without the possibility of parole.
So you're 21 at this point?
20.
Still 20. And you're looking at the next, if you should live that long, 60 years?
I was essentially on death row. I just didn't have a date to go to the gas chamber. That's how I looked at it. That's just the true facts of it.
Yeah, living death sentence.
Yes.
Right. So you got to prison, and you could have easily just melted down, collapsed. I'm sure you saw a lot of guys that did, that killed themselves, that got into drugs or other things, maybe inadvertently killed themselves, or who just gave up hope, but you didn't.
Absolutely not.
In fact, from what I read, quite the opposite. What'd you do? How'd you do it?
Well, first when I got there, I'm seeing all type of crazy stuff. You know what I'm saying? Stabbings, rapes, I've seen guys hang themselves, all types of stuff. So I'm walking the yard, and an older gentleman sees me. He said, listen, young fella, you walking around there acting tough. You need to be in the law library so you can learn the law and get your butt out of here. So I was asking, where's the law library? He said, come out tomorrow and I'll show you. I come out the next day. He takes me to the law library and he begins to teach me the law. So throughout the trial, I didn't understand anything about none of the processes that they were taking. They was talking about common law. They was talking about the Constitution. They was talking about statutes, jury instruction, Michigan rules of evidence. Didn't understand any of that stuff. So he began to teach me this stuff. And as I began to learn this stuff, I felt empowered. The more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. The more I read, the more I wanted to read. And so now I'm understanding how they got me here, at least from a legal standpoint. I'm understanding, the statutes, MCL 75316, the murder statute. I'm understanding all these different court rules. And so each day is a challenge, but I got to be strong and I got to keep going. In spite of me feeling like I'm in a twilight zone or something. Couldn't believe that I'm here with a life sentence, but I had no choice but to keep going. A lot of guys going to the prisons, they get into drugs, gangs, gambling. I was laser focused on being in the law library, learning the law so I could get out. I had children out there, I had family out there, mother and father out there that I wanted to get back to. And they were my motivating force and inspiration to keep going until I could prove that I was innocent. And that was the key factor, that I knew I was innocent. I was not going to just surrender my liberty like a coward and just give up. I couldn't do it.
And who was the guy that mentored you this way?
His name is Mandrick Bonner. He did 48 years. He's out now as well. He did 48 years. His name is Mandrick Bonner.
Mandrick Bonner. Well, maybe we'll dedicate the episode to him because he sounds like he's the real hero in this story, other than you. And of course, all due respect. But so Mandrick Bonner became your mentor, your legal eagle, so to speak, and you hit the law library. So how much time were you able to spend? And first of all, which prison were you in?
Well, they sent me to the oldest prison in the state of Michigan, the Michigan Reformatory, called the Gladiator School. It was built in the 1800s. Big, drab, ugliest place you ever wanted to see. And that's where that's where I was initially sent to from quarantine. And so, but again, Mandrick began to teach me stuff. I ended up getting my GED. I got my associate degree. I began to study to get my bachelor's. I began to study everything I could study to try to learn about me. And mind you, when I first went, I was hateful. I hated everything. I hated the police. I hated my lawyer. I hated everything because it had failed me. But the more I began to educate myself, learn about myself, I became more spiritual, I could say, and then more positive. And as I became more spiritual and more positive, good people began to come into my life, lawyers, doctors, friends, and so it was as I evolved in terms of my knowledge, I began to look now for legal resources to get the hell out of prison. And in prison, everything is, I used to sneak into the law library, but everything is controlled. Like you have to have a call out to get into the library. So every day they pass out these sheets of paper. You have to sign up for it. Maybe a week later, they'll put you on the law library. But I would sneak into the law library. Anybody could just walk in, but to do it properly, you had to be on call out to get in.
That's crazy. I've never heard that before. Sneaking, jumping out of
library.
windows, sneaking into libraries. I mean, you got this is a whole element of the fugitive in this story. It's incredible, but that's amazing. And so, how much time were you able to spend in the law library, like in an average week or so?
Probably 4 hours a day.
Wow.
2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night.
Incredible.
One of the things that Darrell said, though, he had told me early on, is he learned the language of the law, and that empowered him. We go to a different country, we don't know the language, we can't even order off the menu. When Darrell was in trial, he couldn't even order off the menu. He learned the language of the law, and then he became fluent in that language, and that he learned that became his weapon. That's what's so empowering. And you've been in this conference, Jason, this week. Yesterday's lunchtime, the keynote speaker said something that really resonated with me. He said, you have to be an agent of your own change.
Well, one of the things that I did was every day I wrote somebody. Every day. I got piles of letters denying my request or saying we couldn't help you, but I remained undeterred and I just kept writing. In 2002, the Innocence Project got involved with my case. They weren't referred to as Innocence Project at that time. University of Michigan appointed me 4 law students, 2 professors. They came, worked the case up, researched it, and they were the ones who ultimately discovered the identification gaps where these guys couldn't see what they said they saw from where they said they seen it from. It was impossible, physically impossible. They found out all type of evidence. We still go to trial, had a 2-day evidentiary hearing. The judge denies it. I'm crushed. So another 10 years go by. And they opened up what they call the Conviction Integrity Unit, the Wayne County Conviction Integrity Unit, 2017. And I was one of the first cases. So I get this report from David Balash, and we submit it to the Conviction Integrity Unit. They look at it. I ultimately, and this a lot of this stuff happens, just happenstance. I mean, it's only by the grace of God, because we go to an evidentiary hearing, and the Zoom session, it don't work. So they postpone it. And then the Conviction Integrity Unit says, hey, let me take a look at this case. They take a look at it, and the more they get into it, they start unraveling the whole thing. And it's headed by a wonderful person, Valerie Newman. She's the director of the Wayne County Conviction Integrity Unit, and Kim Worthy, who was obviously the prosecutor, Wayne County prosecutor. And so they got to looking in the case, and I subsequently filed a Freedom of Information Act request for this guy's personnel file, and that's when I found out that this guy wasn't an expert at all, in addition to other things. And that's how this whole thing began to unravel, and I ultimately got out of prison.
Right, and it's after all these horrible things that had happened, there was actually, it was kind of a lucky break, because in another jurisdiction, without a Kim Worthy, without a Valerie Newman, without a Conviction Integrity Unit, and most places don't have them, you'd probably still be in prison and you would have died there, right?
Yes.
So these people deserve their flowers as well. And this is why it's so important that we elect worthy people. Like,
yes.
That's an apt name.
Yes,
under the
absolutely.
circumstances. So go ahead. Yeah. Well,
Kim Worthy, the Wayne County prosecutor, she had made her bones, I'll say. She convicted 2 police officers for beating a guy to death, Malice Green. But she's a staunch, conservative, pro-law and order prosecutor. For her to do something like form a Conviction Integrity Unit to try to get things right, to recognize that there are mistakes that happen, that's a big thing. And anybody who doesn't believe in divine intervention, what Darrell didn't say was, at this hearing, it's in front of a notorious judge who you could forget about it as soon as you see that judge's name come up, who's going to hear this case. You're not going to get relief. Everybody in the business knew it. They came to this hearing, and the expert was out of town, and as he's supposed to get up on the TV, there was a glitch. And because of that glitch, they postponed the hearing and they adjourned it, and in that gap of time, the newly formed Conviction Integrity Unit says, we'll take a look at the case. That's divine intervention. That's the whole idea of you would never be out. I wouldn't even know you. But this happened, a glitch. And the CIU said, we're not interested in just finality. We're interested in truth and making sure that if you are innocent and you can prove it, then we will help. And that's what happened in his case. They're the ones who took the bull by the horns, and the information that Darrell was lucky enough to get of this police firearms expert, who, by the way, what hadn't come out and hasn't really come out was 10 years before he had been arrested with a bunch of other cops for being a dirty cop and being on the payroll of an ambulance chaser. They had all these problems in the 70s where cops were sending accident reports to ambulance chasing lawyers. And he was one of the guys who got arrested for that. So he's already got a dirty background. And this, in combination with everything else, helped Darrell get exonerated. And then this idea that we were able to discover in the civil lawsuit about the Brady violations that this cop, the lead detective, had, that kind of broke the case open from a civil standpoint.
Even an atheist like me can see that's a miracle.
Right.
So, yeah. So that's amazing. So now finally the tide has turned. And what happens leading up to your eventual Was it an acquittal, exoneration? Did they agree to drop the charges? How did that work? And yeah, I mean, we've been through the muck with you on this case, through the misery and all the you know hardship is too light of a word, but now there's light at the end of the tunnel. And this is always my favorite part of these stories. Unfortunately, too many of them don't have that light yet, but we're gonna keep pushing until they do. So, tell us about that.
Well, I had an attorney from the State Public Defender's Office named Michael Waldo. So they submitted my case to the Conviction Integrity Unit, and he said, "Man, this is a new unit. I don't know what your chances is, but you'll get a decision by Tuesday." So, and this was like maybe 3 months. No, I think it was maybe, about 3 months in. So Tuesday come, and the officer comes down to my room, said, "Darrell," he said, "Mr. Siggers, you have a phone call. Your lawyer wants to talk to you. You got to go up on base." I come up on base. I get on the phone, and he says, the first words out of his mouth was, "Darrell, they vacated your conviction." So when he said this, now mind you, I've been essentially on death row for 34 years, walking around. Imagine walking around every day with a life sentence for a crime you didn't commit. And time for a person that's innocent is much, much harder than it is for a person who's guilty. So when he said this, it was like I was so filled with elation and emotion, I could barely say anything else. So he kept talking, and I really wasn't hearing anything else he said because it's just so many thoughts rushed in my brain at the same time. It was like I was in the Matrix. My vision began to narrow. I didn't hear anything else, and it was like I was just floating on air. So I said, "Listen, man, I need a moment to comport myself." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Just give me a moment, man. Can you call back in 5 minutes, please?" Hang up, walk down to my room, get on my knees, pray, cry, and that's how this all occurred. Officer comes back down to the room, said, "Mr. Siggers, you're no longer under the Michigan Department of Corrections jurisdiction. You got to be gone by 12 o'clock. And that's how it happened.
What time was it that he said that?
About 11. And I told him, we can go now. We can go now. And I had all this stuff. He wanted me to pack up, because I had Foot Lockers and at this time, cassette players and, some that young people don't even know what it is now, where you put these little tapes in and I had to pack up all my books, all my paper, all the stuff that I had accumulated for 34 years in this one little space. He wanted me to pack it all up because you got to move it because they got to have this room for somebody else. So I said, "Look, we can leave now." He was like, "No, you got to pack up all this stuff." So I pushed all that stuff out into the middle of the rock or the hallway and said, "Hey, anybody want some free stuff?" Them guys came and grabbed it, and it was gone. And he came back down. He said, "Mr. Siggers, that's not what I had in mind." I said, "Well, it's gone." And so and we went off and that's how this all occurred. Something went to the court, and Wolf was there. It's a newscast on that. Wolf was working with me throughout the, in the final stages of it, helping me coordinate and work with the court. And we got to court, and the judge, the prosecutor presented a motion to dismiss and vacate the case. And my defense lawyer he said, "Yes, okay, we concede to that." And the judge said, "Mr. Siggers, your conviction is vacated, case dismissed, you're free to go."
That's all he said?
That's all she said.
Oh, she said. That's all she said.
Mm-hmm.
And then you walked out of the courthouse into, was it hot? Was it cold? Was it people there?
It was
News
August
cameras?
10th, 2018. Beautiful weather. Walked out. My son was there. My daughter was there. Wolf was there. Another lawyer was there. My sister was there. And so it was just the most beautiful experience of my life, just to be able to breathe some fresh air and not be locked in a cage or being told what to do. Mind you, in prison, there's nowhere you can go in prison where there's not another prisoner or a camera within 2 feet of you. So you're watched every second of the day, and you're always close to another prisoner. You're in a room with another prisoner. a bunkie, you know. And so to be free from that, I mean, even now, it's almost like I have to, I've had dreams that I'm still in prison. Most of my dreams are still about prison because you go through that for so many years. And I've been in prison where I dreamed many times that I was free only to wake up, I'm still in prison. And so when I finally get out, just to have, it's like, even now, like again, even now, sometimes I had to say to myself, is this real? Are you really out? Am I dreaming? I have to just say, am I dreaming? And it's just the most wonderful feeling in the world to be free after all of that stuff. And you just don't just walk away from 35 years. A lot of that stuff, that's what formed me, you know, even at 20 years old, but it formed me. So you just don't walk away from that. And so now I'm living life on my own terms and I'm having a ball.
That's great. Now, I don't know if you want to touch on it or not, but I understand that there was a tragedy that occurred around the same time that you were being freed.
Yes. Um, are you referring to my daughter? Yes. 1 month after I got out, September 11th, my daughter passed. And nothing in life could have prepared me for that because I had fought so many years to get out just to be with her and my grandchildren. And then for her to pass, I didn't get a chance to really spend no time with her. And so I've lost all my family while I was in prison. I lost my mother, my father, my oldest brother, youngest sister, uh, virtually all my family. And so to lose her on, after getting out was a punch in the gut. I mean, something I could never expect. And but you go on. What else can you do? You go on.
Yeah, well, rest in peace. But you have a bunch of grandchildren now, right?
Yes, 8.
So you get to be a great grandfather, not a great grandfather, but a great grandfather,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
and that's beautiful. And yeah, well, it's an amazing story. You're an amazing guy, and you give us, it's people like you and stories like yours that make. And I know I'm speaking for Wolf and everybody here, that you make us want to work harder and smarter to make sure the next Darrell gets his day to come home and see his family waiting for him. And now we get to come to my favorite part of the show. And this part of the show is called Closing Arguments. I feel pretty proud that I created that name. Kind of clever, right? I think I created it. Maybe it was our producer, Connor Hall. I don't know. He might have done it, but I take credit for it anyway. But Closing Arguments is, like I said, it's my favorite part of the show because this is a part of the show where, first of all, I thank both of you guys for being here and sharing your perspectives on this just unbelievable odyssey that you went through. Um, and I've learned a lot today, and I appreciate that. So, and then what I'm going to do is turn my microphone off and just kick back in my chair and listen to anything else that you think we may have left out that needs to be said or that you want to say. Um, and that literally could be anything. The floor is yours. So, we always save our most honored guest for last. So, Darrell, let's turn it over to Wolf. Let him share his thoughts, and then you can just hand the mic over to Darrell to take us off into the sunset.
I think for my closing argument, I think the biggest lesson that can be learned in this case is that, fortunately, since the advent of the smartphone and videos on phones, we don't put the police on such a high pedestal anymore. We need to look at them with the human frailties that everybody else has. And they are in such a position of power. With power comes that great responsibility. And when you abuse that power, you have to be held accountable just like the rest of us. And we went through 5 years of civil litigation before we were able to have a successful result. The wheels of justice turn slowly. But when people have the strength to be an agent for their own change, his story is like so many others, that these good things can happen, but you have to help fight for yourself. You can't just rely on the system. The system is not going to do it by itself. And that's why guys like Darrell, guys like the three gentlemen we saw yesterday who are such agents for change. And then you have to look past yourself. And Darrell understands, and these other guys, there are so many innocent people in prison. 5% is a conservative number who are wrongfully convicted in prison, most of which are murders, most of whom are going to die either in states that have a death penalty or like Michigan without a death penalty, but it's still, you're on death row because just no date certain. But that's what they have. The system is not designed to look, once you've been convicted, at whether you were guilty or innocent. And that's why it's so important that these innocence projects exist, that these conviction integrity units exist to get it right. Because this is just, everybody's got to bring their best game because it's just too important. Freedom is on the line. The Constitution is on the line. And that's why it starts with the integrity of the police. And if we don't do a better job of policing the police, it doesn't get better.
One of the things that I've learned, and it's a real sad commentary, is the law really isn't blind. Them scales of justice, it really isn't blind. There's so much discrimination, racism, classism in our judicial system. And I've lived with guys who I know are innocent, but they didn't have the mental acuity to learn the law. And the law is a very, very complex language or just science in and of itself. Just like you go to a doctor, and if you look at all these long terms that they use and their medications or whatever, it's the same with law. And some guys just give up. It's just too hard. And so for me, it was just a matter of staying with it, learning it, seeing successes, measuring. And I didn't try to learn all the law. I only wanted to learn what was pertaining to me. But the saddest commentary is when you look at, you can look at a judge, see who appointed them, and know whether your case is going to be granted or denied. If you get a Trump appointee, you know your chances are very, very slim. If you get somebody who's appointed by Obama, you got a better shot because they're going to be more fair. And that's very, very sad because the law, when you submit a brief or a motion, it's supposed to be decided based on the facts in that motion, not on all these procedures or not whether you're conservative or liberal or whether you're Republican, or it shouldn't be like that. Wolf, great lawyer. I've learned so much from him. I mean, he's started me off in speaking. I've been to every major university in the state of Michigan, giving speeches. I've been across the country, working with people. I've been back inside the prisons, working with young people, creating reentry programs. But we filed our lawsuit, solid issues. Go to the United States Court of Appeals, we get 2 Trump appointees and a Bush appointee, and they butcher the appeal. They reduce it, deny one of the claims. They bent over backwards to violate their own law just to deny me. And he could talk more about that, but that's one of the things that surprises me more than anything else. That's why I have no faith in the law. I don't believe in it. I think it's all BS because the real law are the judges. They just use the law as a tool to settle your lawsuit or whatever it is any way they choose. So for all intents and purposes, the law is just a bunch of abstract legal theories that are open to interpretation. And who interprets the law? The judges do. And so that was a realization that I had to come to, that it's not about your emotion. It's not about what you write in this brief. You have to first consider this judge. And I had one of the most horrible judges, the most conservative judge in probably in Recorder's Court, Detroit Recorder's Court. And for years, she stayed on the bench and denied anything that I filed. Wouldn't even look at it, just would deny it and found ways to deny it. And speaking to the CSI thing, she said during the hearing, when she denied it, she said, I thought this was going to be something like CSI. And we were looking at each other like, this is real life. This ain't CSI. She actually said that. It's on the record. I thought this was going to be something. And all these 4 law students was there. They was looking at each other. This ain't CSI. You don't get in a trial or post-conviction evidentiary hearing, you don't get to pick your witnesses. Your witnesses come as they are. It ain't a script. And so, but the saddest commentary was just knowing that if you get a certain judge, you out of there, or you got a reasonable shot, depending on who it is. And we just happen to get the worst judge, but because of his brilliance, because of his knowledge, because of his skill, it was still a very good outcome. which is surprising. I'm forever grateful to him for the result, because after what the Sixth Circuit did, after they reduced the lawsuit, denied several of the claims, he still was able to make it work. And I truly appreciate that. And I've learned so much from him. He take me to colleges all over. We go to Central Michigan University. We speak together, and I've learned so much from him, and I'm just eternally grateful to him, for real. And he's a friend. We friends. I can call him. He picks up my call whenever I call him, and the same. So that's my closing argument.